The endocrine system, anatomy and physiology. Have you ever wondered how your body knows when to grow, sleep, and even respond to stress? In fact, behind the scenes, there is a silent communicator at work, and that is the endocrine system. Okay, in this video, we would begin a clear and simple exegesis of the endocrine system, exploring how hormones act like messengers to keep everything in the body running smoothly. Okay, from the brain's tiny pituitary gland to powerful glands like the adrenal gland. Okay, so get ready to discover the small organs with big responsibilities in your body. Okay, if you find this video helpful, please support the channel by subscribing, clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and also dropping a comment below. Let's learn and grow together. The endocrine system, anatomy and physiology. Okay, now before we begin, I want you to imagine a silent command center in your body, a messaging system that never sleeps, a messaging system that actually controls your growth, hunger, sleep, stress, metabolism, heartbeat, and even mood. All of these things without saying a single word or uttering a word. Okay, and that is how the endocrine system actually works. Okay, good. Now, the endocrine system, anatomy and physiology. In fact, the endocrine system is a complex network of glands and organs that produce and release hormones, chemical messengers that actually travel through the bloodstream to regulate the body's internal environment and also maintain homeostasis. Okay, now the general location. In fact, the endocrine organs in the body are distributed throughout the body, from the brain to pelvic region. Unlike other organs where you can say they are usually in other systems, that you can say that they are usually in a defined area in the body, like the urinary system. You could see that the urinary system organs are at a defined area, specific region within the body. But for the endocrine system, the organs or glands of the endocrine system are distributed throughout the body. You can find some of the glands or the organs in the brain, and then some as far as in the pelvic region. Is that okay? So in terms of the general location, they are distributed throughout the body, from the brain to the pelvic region. Okay, but then despite their scattered locations, they work together through the bloodstream to coordinate vital body functions. Okay, so basically, the endocrine system is a complex network of glands and organs that actually produce and release hormones. Okay, chemical messengers that travel through the bloodstream to regulate the body's internal environment and also maintain homeostasis. Okay, now it works to maintain homeostasis, trying to ensure that the body is operating, the internal component of the body is operating in a stable condition, just like organ systems like the urinary system. Is that okay? Now, common characteristics of endocrine organs. Okay, so over here we'll be looking at some common characteristics of endocrine organs. In fact, endocrine organs are ductless organs. They are ductless, meaning they secrete their hormones directly into the blood. Okay, so if you look at endocrine organs, there is nothing like a duct, okay, connecting endocrine organs to their target cells. They always release their secretions into the blood. Then the blood helps to transport, the signals to the target cells. Okay, that's why we say that endocrine organs are ductless. They secrete their hormones directly into the blood. Okay, now endocrine organs are highly vascularized. They are highly vascularized. Okay, and that is, endocrine organs are surrounded by rich capillary networks for hormone delivery. Okay, and this is very important because endocrine organs, they release their secretions into the blood. Okay, and because of that, most endocrine organs, you find a lot of blood vessels or capillaries around them. Okay, and that makes them highly vascularized. Okay, now Endocrine organs are target specific. So that means that with the endocrine organs, the hormones that they release or they secrete, okay, the hormones target specific organs or specific cells in the body. Okay, because imagine that a particular gland releases a certain hormone and the hormone can affect, or all other organs in the body are receptive to that hormone. You can imagine the chaos that will happen in the body. Okay, so endocrine organs, the hormones that they secrete, they are target specific. That means that the hormones act only on cells with the matching receptors. Okay, so only the cells that have receptors for that hormone is the cell that will be able to pick up the signal or the message. Okay, so endocrine organs are target specific. Now, they are slow but longer acting. Effects are gradual but sustained compared to the nervous system. Okay, chemical messengers only. So endocrine system deals with chemical messaging. Is that okay? They are entirely based on chemical signaling and no electrical signals like that of the nervous system. So endocrine system only uses chemical signaling, unlike the nervous system that uses electrical signals. Endocrine system uses chemical signaling. Is that okay? Good. Now, let's look at some concepts in the endocrine system anatomy and physiology. Now, we have this word over here, wireless communication. Okay, so for endocrine system, hormones travel through the bloodstream, meaning no physical connection is needed between the gland and the target cells, just like how Wi-Fi works. More like a Wi-Fi for the body. You see, in Wi-Fi, if you look at Wi-Fi or hotspots, okay, so connecting internet using Wi-Fi or hotspot, you realize that there is nothing like a wire connecting the phone to the other phone or the router to the other device. Is that okay? There is no connection. Is that okay? That is how the endocrine system works. Okay, there is no connection between where the source is and where, the device receiving the signal is. Is that okay? That is how the endocrine system operates. Okay, so it's more like a wireless communication. Okay, so if you are using a phone for hotspot and then you are receiving or getting the reception on another phone, you realize that there is nothing like a connection, electrical cable connecting one phone to the other. Is that is the whole mindset with, or the whole idea with the endocrine system. Okay, so the hormone travels through the bloodstream. So that means that there is no physical connection, more like something like a tube, and then the hormone is secreted into the tube. No, nothing like that. Is that okay? Then it is target specific action. Okay, and I've explained that already, that even though hormones circulate through the body, they only affect cells with the right receptors. Okay, offering that a higher specificity without wiring. Okay, good. And then they are built in feedback loops. Okay, so they use positive and negative feedback mechanisms to self-regulate the release of the hormones, ensuring hormonal balance. So, endocrine system uses this mechanism, built-in feedback loops. Okay, so they use the positive and negative feedback mechanism. Okay, that is how they use it. They use these two mechanisms to regulate, okay, balance, or to help achieve homeostasis. So, for example, if a particular gland is releasing a certain hormone, at a point when it is able to achieve a certain level of stability, there is a mechanism that will come in to help suppress it. And it uses these two mechanisms to achieve that. And there are some hormones that once they start being produced, they have to continue producing. Those ones will use the positive feedback mechanism. And there are some hormones or glands that once they produce to a certain level, they have to be negated. And those ones will use the negative feedback mechanism. Okay, so these are the two mechanisms that the endocrine system uses. So imagine that a gland is always producing, and at the end, the result or the end of that organ or that gland activation would cause something maybe bad, and it is not being stopped. There is no mechanism to stop it. It will cause a lot of, it will affect homeostasis. Okay, that is why we have these two mechanisms the built-in feedback loops, okay, mechanism to help control the activities of the glands and then the hormones. Okay, good. Then the other thing is that endocrine organs or glands are constantly going through adjustments. Okay, constant adjustments. Okay, so they are continuously being adjusted. Okay, or continuously adjust internal functions without conscious control. Okay, more like working 24/7 behind the scene. Okay, but then continuously they undergo adjustments. Okay, so the hormone keep producing. At a point, the function we want to achieve, we've obtained it. There should be a mechanism to come and stop it. When now we need the function to come in again, or the gland to be activated again, there is a mechanism that will come and activate it. So constantly, the system is undergoing adjustment. The endocrine glands are undergoing adjustments. That's the endocrine system. Now let's look at the functions of the endocrine system. The functions of the endocrine system. The endocrine system helps to regulate growth and development. Okay, so for hormones, like we have a hormone we call the growth hormone, GH. These hormones control physical development from infancy through adulthood. Okay, the endocrine system also helps to maintain homeostasis. How? Okay, so homeostasis, we mean the balances in internal conditions such as temperature, fluid balance, and then pH. Okay, the endocrine system plays a massive role in helping to regulate your temperature. That is thermoregulation. It plays massive role in fluid balance. We have hormones that promote reabsorption of water. We have hormones that promote reabsorption of sodium and water. We have hormones that, are related to acid-base balance. Is that okay? And that is why we say that the endocrine system helps to maintain homeostasis. The endocrine system also helps to control metabolism. Is that okay? It helps to control metabolism. It helps to regulate how your body converts food into energy. Okay, it helps to regulate how your body converts food into energy. So the endocrine system helps to control your metabolism. Okay, regulating how your body converts food into energy. Example, like the thyroid hormones. Is that okay? Your thyroid hormones. Okay, because they play massive role in metabolism, how your body converts food into energy. The endocrine system also helps to regulate mood and emotions. Okay, and that means that it affects mental health through hormones like cortisol and then serotonin. Okay, the endocrine system also helps to control reproductive processes. Okay, because the endocrine system governs sexual development, your menstrual cycles, pregnancy, and even lactation. And the endocrine system also influences sleep-wake cycles, like the melatonin from the pineal gland, which helps to control the circadian rhythms. Okay, sometimes imagine how when you sleep, is that okay? Sometimes at a certain point in time, nobody have control over the exact time they sleep. Is that okay? We have a gland responsible for that, the pineal gland. Is that okay? It controls what we call the circadian rhythm. Circadian rhythm is like a rhythm involved in how and when you sleep, when you wake up, and all those things. We have a gland that is responsible for that. And we will look at all that into detail as we move on. The endocrine system also manages stress response. Okay, it manages stress response, like cortisol and adrenaline help the body respond to physical and emotional stress. Okay, the endocrine system also affects heart rate and blood pressure. Is that okay? We have hormones like adrenaline, which can increase your cardiac output in situations of emergency. Okay, so you realize that the endocrine system is very important, looking at the range of functions that this system performs. Okay, similar to systems like the urinary system, all other systems, how they are. The endocrine system too is very relevant. Okay, regulating growth and development. This is a very essential part of every human anatomy and physiology. Maintaining your hemostasis, very important. Controlling metabolism, regulating mood and emotions, controlling reproductive processes, influencing sleep-wake cycles, managing stress, and then it's having an impact on your heart rate and blood pressure. Okay, good. Now let's look at these diagrams. Okay, so you see over here, we have an endocrine cell over here. This diagram is showing an endocrine cell. Okay, and this is like different cells. So we have this cell, we have another cell over here. So you see, this endocrine cell is communicating. If you look at the arrow over here, it's red. That should tell you that the endocrine organs, when they release their hormones, they go through the blood. That is what this diagram is telling you. You see, you could have used a different color to, paint this arrow, but we use red just to tell you that endocrine organs, when they release their hormones, they go through the blood. Okay, so we have the hormone over here, which is the message. So the signal has been sent. That is the message. That is the hormone. And the question is, do you hear me? Let's come over here. You see, this is a target cell. The target cell said yes. The target cell has responded specifically to the question that was asked. Do you hear me? The target cell say yes. That should tell you that this target cell has receptors. So you see, we have a receptor on the target cell, which is picking up the signal, the reception. We have a target. So you see, it's full network. And if you look at phones, mobile phones, you see this, this sign on the phone indicating whether the network or the reception is good or bad. Okay, so you see the target cell is having the receptor for the network. Okay, so this is more like the internet network. Okay, going through the bloodstream. You will not see any wire. You cannot see any wire connecting this to this. Okay, so it's like the thing is through the blood. Then this target cell, because it is having a receptor, it receives the information. Okay, it says yes. But look at the other cell. The other cell says who? Meaning the thing is not even picking the signal. There is no network on it. So check, there is no receptor, no reception on it. Meaning this cell cannot pick up the signal. Is that okay? This cell will never be able to pick up the signal. This is the cell that will be able to pick up the signal. And in fact, this image is explaining exactly how the endocrine organs, how they work. Okay, now if you look over here, we have an exocrine gland. We mentioned of this gland when we were looking at the integumentary system, the exocrine gland. Okay, so you see exocrine gland. This is an example of an exocrine gland. The exocrine glands, usually they release their secretions through a duct. So you see over here, there is a duct. Okay, there's an example of the sweat gland, okay, in the skin. So you see, it releases its secretion into a duct. Okay, into a duct. Okay, but when it comes to endocrine glands, look, this is an example of an endocrine gland. You see the endocrine cells inside. So the cells inside, the structure inside, is an example of what? An endocrine gland. Okay, and you realize that you see endocrine glands, we mentioned that they are usually surrounded with network of capillaries. They are highly vascularized. So you see there is a blood vessel surrounding it. Look at it carefully. You can see a blood vessel surrounding it. Is that okay? Blood vessel is surrounding the gland. Okay, so you see when it releases its secretion, look at the arrow. It goes into the blood. Its secretion goes into the blood. Okay, because there is a blood vessel. You see blood in capillaries. Okay, so it releases its secretion directly into the blood. So hormones are secreted into the blood. And this is an endocrine gland. But this one, you see, this is the exocrine cells. When it releases its secretion, it releases it into a duct. So this is a duct. Is that okay? So the difference between exocrine gland and endocrine is that this one releases their secretory products into a duct, and this one releases it into the blood. Is that okay? Let's look at this diagram over here. Okay, let's look at this diagram over here. Okay, good. This diagram over here, we are going to look at different ways of communication between cells. Okay, several ways of communicating between cells. So here we have autocrine signaling. Over here we have paracrine signaling. Okay, so we have autocrine signaling, we have paracrine signaling, and then we have endocrine signaling. Now let's begin with the autocrine signaling. With autocrine signaling, okay, that is when a particular endocrine cell or a cell, so a cell releases its secretion, okay, and the same cell is having a receptor for its own secretory products. So you see this very cell, it is releasing a certain secretory product, and the same cell is having receptors, okay, for that product that it is releasing. And this kind of signaling is what we call autocrine signaling. So this is the key to the diagram. You see, we have the receptor over here and we have the signal. Okay, so it is releasing its secretory product, which is more like the signal. And that same cell is having receptors for that signal. Okay, directly. It is having a direct receptor. So the signal has a direct receptor to the same cell. So that same cell releasing the secretory product is having a signal. So that same cell is a target. That's the meaning. So the same cell is having what? Receptors for the signal that or secretory products that it is releasing. Okay, so more like the target site for the secretory product of the cell is the same cell. Let me repeat it again. The target site for the secretory product of the cell is that same cell. That kind of communication or signaling is autocrine signaling. And the next type of signaling or class, we call it the paracrine signaling. The paracrine. Okay, the paracrine signaling. Is that okay? Good. Now look at the diagram carefully. Okay, look at the diagram carefully. Now, with the paracrine signaling, okay, this is a secretory cell. So this is a cell. The cell is releasing its secretory product or the signal. And another cell or an adjacent cell, another cell is rather the one having the receptors for the signal. Okay, it doesn't go through any channel. The other cell is directly having receptors for the channel. And this type of signaling is called paracrine signaling. Paracrine signaling. Okay, paracrine signaling. Now let's look at the endocrine signaling, which is the last type of signal, the endocrine signaling. Now with the endocrine signaling, okay, now we have a cell over here or a secretory cell over here. But in this situation, the secretory cell releases its what? Secretory product into the blood. And then the product or the signal goes through the blood and is sent to a distant target cell which has receptors for that secretory product. Is that okay? Now look, the difference between paracrine signaling and endocrine signaling is that you see paracrine signaling, this secretory cell releases the secretory product or the signal, and a different cell has receptors for the signal. But then in the case of paracrine, it goes directly. It will not have to go through the blood before going to the adjacent target cell. But over here, the secretory product has to be released into the bloodstream, and then it flows through the blood before it reaches or goes to the distant target cell. And this is what we call the endocrine signaling. The endocrine signaling. Okay, so they are two different things. Okay, they are two different things. So the difference is that, and sometimes, let me tell you, the interesting thing is that sometimes an endocrine, we can have endocrine autocrine signaling. Okay, but the conclusion is that before the thing will be endocrine, even if this cell, it releases a product, and the same cell have receptors for that product. Once it is endocrine, it still have to enter the blood before it comes back. That is the beauty of endocrine system. Is that okay? So let's assume it's an endocrine autocrine signaling. When it releases its secretory product, okay, even if this same cell, okay, this same secretory cell is having receptors, okay, for the secretory product that is releasing, for it to be endocrine, it still have to enter the blood before it comes to that same cell. That's the interest. That is what makes it endocrine system. Okay, and that is what is going to make you really understand endocrine system. So the point with endocrine system is that the thing, whether or not it is coming, even if the same secretory cell is having a receptor, like we have in the autocrine signaling, it's having a receptor for the secretory product, it still has to enter the blood before it comes back to it. Okay, and that is the definition of the endocrine system. So the thing is, the thing has to enter the blood before it reaches the target cell with the receptors. And even if the same secretory cell has receptors for it, still, for it to be endocrine, it has to enter the blood. Okay, so this diagram, I would rather define this diagram like endocrine paracrine signaling. Endocrine paracrine signaling. So you see, we have a cell over here, and an adjacent cell is having the receptors. Just that the only difference is that because it's endocrine, it has to pass through the blood. But over here, you see, there is nothing like blood component. It goes directly. That is paracrine. Is that okay? That is paracrine. So these are means of communication, biological means of communication in the body. Autocrine signaling, paracrine signaling, and then endocrine signaling. Okay, and this is completely different from the nervous system, whereby we always have neurotransmitter receptor molecules. Is that okay? So the endocrine system, whereby the transmission is usually through a nerve cell. Is that okay? More like the internet. So the nervous system is more like the internet through poles. You see, electricity. More like electricity, uses electrical signals. So the nervous system is more like electricity. Electricity, we use wires that is connecting from one point to the other. That is the likeness of that of the nervous system. Okay, but the endocrine system is like a wireless connection, like we have over here in the diagram at the right side. Okay, good. Now let's look at some key terms in the endocrine system. Some key terms. Okay, we will begin with hormones. In fact, hormones are chemical messengers that are released into the blood that affect target cells and organs. That's a hormone. When we say a hormone is a chemical messenger that is released into the bloodstream, which has the ability to affect target cells and organs. Now, the next item is endocrine glands. In fact, organs that produce and secrete hormones directly into the blood. Example, the pituitary, the thyroid, the adrenal, and then the pancreas. Okay, so for endocrine glands are organs. Okay, when we see a gland is an endocrine gland, you use this definition, this. Okay, this is an endocrine signaling. So it tells you that if a gland is an endocrine gland, it releases its secretion into the bloodstream, and then the secretion in the form of signal goes and affect a target cell that has receptors, or a cell that has receptors for that hormone that it released. Okay, that is an endocrine gland. So when we see an endocrine gland, the organs or the glands that produce and secrete hormones directly into the bloodstream. For example, the pituitary and thyroid, adrenal and pancreas are all endocrine glands. Exocrine glands. Okay, now exocrine glands, on the other hand, are glands that release their products through ducts onto surfaces or into body cavities. Example, sweat. The sweat glands, salivary glands, the pancreas, and the pancreas, especially when secreting the digestive enzymes. Okay, because the pancreas also have some endocrine functions. Now we have receptors. Receptor is more like a protein molecule on or within target cells that specifically bind to the hormones. That is a receptor. So when we say a receptor is like a protein molecule. Okay, when we say a receptor, that is what it means. It's like a protein molecule. Okay, good. So a receptor is like a protein molecule that is on or within the target cell that specifically binds to a hormone. So like over here, you see, these are the receptors. So you see, this is the hormone, or this is the secretory product from the gland. Okay, let's use this one rather, because we are doing endocrine. So you see, this is the secretory product. It has released this into the bloodstream. And this cell, you see, the cell is having receptor. These are the receptors. This is the receptor. So you see, this cell is having receptors on their surface. But what we are saying is that sometimes the receptors can be in the cell. Okay, so protein molecules on or within the target cell that specifically bind to the hormones. That's a receptor. Then we have target cells or organs. These are the cells that respond to specific hormones due to the presence of matching receptors. Then now homeostasis. Homeostasis refers to the body's ability to maintain a stable internal environment. Okay, now negative feedback. Now, for negative feedback, a control mechanism where a change is reversed to maintain a balance. So when high blood sugar triggers insulin release, that's a negative feedback. Okay, so we have negative feedback mechanism and we have positive feedback mechanism. When we say negative feedback mechanism, okay, that is more like a control mechanism where a change is reversed, okay, to maintain a balance. So for example, if something is getting too high, the change will be that high level will be reversed to low. That is a negative feedback mechanism. So usually negative feedback mechanism, the response at the end of the day will be to negate the initial stimulus. That's a negative feedback mechanism. With a positive feedback mechanism, this is a mechanism that actually amplifies the change instead of reversing the change. For example, in the case of childbirth or labor, is that okay? Usually the response that will come would be to come and amplify the initial stimulus. Is that okay? For example, the release of oxytocin is always through positive feedback mechanism. Is that okay? And also during labor, it always uses the positive feedback mechanism. Then we have neuroendocrine system. Okay, neuroendocrine system has got to do with those close interactions between nervous system and then the endocrine system, especially in regulating hormones. Okay, then we have signaling, which we have looked at. Signaling has got to do with how cells communicate using hormones or molecules. So when we say signaling is about how cells communicate using hormones or molecules. So for example, we have the autocrine signaling, where a cell targets itself. This is the autocrine signaling. So the same secretory cell has receptors for the secretory product of that same cell. That same cell is having receptors. It's more like the cell communicating, targeting itself. Okay, then we have paracrine signaling. A cell targets nearby cell. Okay, so this is the paracrine signaling. Paracrine signaling, the cell targets adjacent cells or nearby cells. Then we have endocrine signaling. The difference is that the cell releases the hormones into the bloodstream to affect distant cells. And sometimes you can have endocrine autocrine signaling. Is that okay? Good. Now, let's look at the major endocrine organs, the hormones they release, and their functions. The major endocrine organs in the body, the hormones they release or they produce, and then their function. We will begin with the hypothalamus. Okay, so we will look at their locations, the locations of the glands, the hormones they produce, and then their function. So we will begin with the hypothalamus. In fact, the hypothalamus is located in the brain. Okay, and for the hormones that they release the thyroid releasing hormone. Okay, corticotrophic releasing hormone, gonadotrophin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, somatostatin, and dopamine. Okay, and the functions of the hormones produced by the hypothalamus is to regulate pituitary gland hormones or regulate the action of the pituitary gland. Okay, and then this gland also have connection or links the nervous system and the endocrine system together. So if we are looking at a gland that actually connects the endocrine system and the nervous system together, is the hypothalamus. Okay, that is the first endocrine organ, the hypothalamus. Okay, the hypothalamus, that is the first endocrine organ, the hypothalamus. Okay, so where is it located? The brain. Okay, what hormones do they produce? The thyroid releasing hormone. Okay, corticotrophic releasing hormone, gonadotrophin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, somatostatin, dopamine. Okay, and the main functions of these hormones is to regulate pituitary gland or the action of the pituitary gland, links the nervous system and then the endocrine system. Okay, now the next organ of the endocrine system is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland. Okay, the pituitary gland. In fact, this gland is located at the base of the brain. Okay, this gland is located at the base of your brain. Okay, now what hormones do they produce? What hormones do they produce? This gland actually produces growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adenocorticotrophic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin releasing hormone, antidiuretic hormone, okay, and then oxytocin. In fact, this gland is responsible for controlling other glands. Okay, it controls other glands, it controls growth, it controls or regulates water balance, reproduction, and then lactation. Okay, so we are talking about the pituitary gland. Where is it located? The base of the brain. And it's very important that you know the location of all these glands. Okay, so the pituitary gland is located at the base of the brain. What hormones do they produce? The growth hormone, the thyroid stimulating hormone, the adenocorticotrophic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone, prolactin, okay, antidiuretic hormone, oxytocin. And all these hormones produced by the pituitary gland, they control other glands. They also control growth, they regulate your water balance, reproduction, and then lactation. Okay, so we are talking about this, the pituitary gland. So you realize that the summary or a clue you can use or apply over here is that all the releasing hormones are usually produced by the hypothalamus, the releasing hormones. Okay, so the thyroid release. So anytime you hear releasing hormone, usually those hormones are produced by the hypothalamus. So thyroid releasing hormone, corticotrophic releasing hormone, gonadotrophin releasing hormone, growth hormone releasing hormone, somatostatin, dopamine, all the releasing hormones. So thyroid releasing hormone, corticotrophic releasing hormone, gonadotrophin releasing hormone, growth hormone, all the releasing hormones are usually produced by the hypothalamus. Then we have the pituitary gland. Where is it located? The base of the brain. The base of the brain. Okay, what are the hormones produced by the pituitary gland? Growth hormone, thyroid stimulating hormone, adenocorticotrophic hormone, follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone. This is prolactin. Okay, then we have antidiuretic hormone, then oxytocin. These are the hormones produced by the pituitary gland. What do? They control other glands, growth, water balance, okay, reproduction, lactation. Now the next on the list is the pineal gland. Where are the pineal glands located? Deep in the brain. What hormone do they produce? They produce melatonin. What is the function of melatonin? This is the hormone responsible for regulating your sleep-wake cycle. Your sleep-wake cycle. Okay. Now the next item on the list is the thyroid gland. Where are they located? The neck, in front of the trachea. Okay. What hormones do they produce? These glands produce the T3 and T4. And also they produce calcitonin. So this gland actually produces 3 hormones. The T3, the T4, and then calcitonin. These 2 are the actual thyroid hormones. Okay, the T3 and T4. And this is calcitonin. What are the functions of the thyroid gland? They regulate metabolism, temperature, growth, and then they also play a role in lowering your blood calcium levels. Okay, now the next item on the list is the parathyroid glands. They are rather located behind the thyroid gland. What hormone do they produce? They produce the parathyroid hormone. And this is the hormone responsible for increasing your blood calcium levels. So you see, the thyroid gland produces calcitonin, which help to lower your calcium levels. Then this gland, the parathyroid gland, also produces the parathyroid hormone, which help to increase your blood calcium levels. Then we have this gland called the adrenal glands, which are located above your kidneys. So on top of the right kidney, we have an adrenal gland. On top of your left kidney too, we have an adrenal gland. What roles do they perform? Or what hormones do they produce? They produce the cortisol, aldosterone, adrenaline, and noradrenaline. What are the main functions of these hormones? They are responsible for stress response, blood pressure control, and then maintaining electrolyte balance in your body. And we'll look at all these glands into details in our next slides. Okay, now the next gland or organ is the pancreas, specifically the endocrine pancreas, because you know the pancreas have both endocrine functions and exocrine functions. Okay, so we'll be looking at the endocrine pancreas, which is located behind the stomach. Okay, it is located behind the stomach. Is that okay? The endocrine pancreas is located behind the stomach. Okay, what hormones do they produce? They produce the insulin, glucagon, somatostatin. What are the functions of these hormones? They regulate your blood glucose levels. Okay, so they produce insulin, glucagon, and somatostatin. What functions do they perform? They regulate the blood glucose levels, or your blood glucose levels. Now, the ovaries for females, okay, where are they located? Pelvic cavity. What hormones do they produce? They produce estrogen and progesterone. Okay, what are the functions of the estrogen and progesterone? They regulate the female reproductive cycle and then secondary sex traits in females. Okay, these are the hormones responsible for that. Okay, so the ovary is also an endocrine gland. It produces estrogen and progesterone, which are all hormones, and they regulate the female reproductive cycle and secondary sex traits. Now, the testis is also an endocrine gland, okay, or an endocrine organ. It's both an organ in reproductive system and an organ in the endocrine system. Okay, the testis in males. Okay, where are they located? In the scrotum. What hormones do they produce? They produce testosterone. And testosterone is the hormone that regulates sperm production and male secondary sex traits. Testosterone. This is the hormone that actually regulates sperm production and male secondary sex traits. Now, the last item on the list is the thymus in children. Thymus gland. Okay, in children. Okay, this gland is actually located in the upper chest behind the sternum. What hormone do they produce? They produce thymosin. Thymosin is actually a hormone that promotes maturity of T lymphocytes and immune functions. In fact, it is believed that these thymus, it usually disappears some point during adult life. Is that okay? So these are the glands or organs of the endocrine system. So we have the hypothalamus, the pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the thyroid gland, the parathyroid glands, the adrenal glands, the pancreas or endocrine glands, the ovaries in females, the testes in males, the thymus in children. Okay, so the hypothalamus is located in the brain, the pituitary gland is located in the base of the brain, the pineal gland. So let's look at this diagram. So these are the major endocrine organs. So you see the hypothalamus is located in the brain, the pituitary gland also in the brain, the pineal gland deep inside the brain, the thyroid gland somewhere in front of your neck, the thymus. Okay, so the thymus gland, the upper chest, usually behind the sternum, they produce the thymosin. And this gland is only present in children and disappears sometime in adult life. We have the endocrine pancreas. Okay, so for endocrine system, if you are talking about pancreas, you have to be specific to say endocrine pancreas. Okay, then we have the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys, the adrenal glands. Then we have the testes for males, the ovaries, so the gonads, we have the testes for males, then the ovaries for females. Is that okay? So we have the adrenal gland. You can see the adrenal gland sitting on top of the kidneys. Okay, then the pancreas is also behind the stomach. The pituitary gland is in the brain. The hypothalamus is in the brain. The pineal gland is deep inside the brain. The thyroid gland in front of the neck. Okay, the ovaries. Okay, testes in people assigned male at birth. Is that okay? So the ovaries, the testes, they are also endocrine organs. So these are the endocrine organs that we have in the body. Now, let's look at other endocrine organs, and we have some other organs which are not necessarily endocrine organs, but because they produce hormones that are released into the blood, we consider them too as endocrine organs. So those ones, we say they are other endocrine organs. For example, the skin. Okay, the skin is located, the skin, specifically the epidermis. You know, the epidermis is the outermost layer of the body. Okay, what hormones do they produce? They produce cholecalciferol. The cholecalciferol, this hormone is the vitamin D precursor. So when we were learning the integumentary system, we mentioned that in the epidermis, Okay, this hormone is being produced, they call it calciferol, which is a vitamin D3 precursor. Okay, and this is the hormone that initiates vitamin D synthesis for calcium absorption in the body. Then we have the liver, an organ like the liver, which is located in the upper right abdomen. Okay, so it releases these 3 hormones, the IGF-1, and then angiotensinogen, and then thrombopoietin. Okay, these hormones actually support growth, responsible for blood pressure regulation, and then platelet formation. Okay, now we have the heart, the atrial of the heart and the ventricles of the heart. In fact, the heart is located in the thoracic cavity. This organ, the heart, releases 2 hormones, the AMP, atrial natriuretic peptide, and then BNP, brain natriuretic peptide. Okay, and these hormones are the hormones that help. These hormones together help to lower blood pressure by promoting sodium and water reabsorption. Okay, then we have the kidneys. Okay, where is it located? Retroperitoneal, posterior abdominal cavity. What hormone do they produce? You remember that when we were learning anatomy, we learned that the urinary system, we learned that the kidney produces a hormone we call erythropoietin. Okay, the kidney even produce renin and calcitrol. Okay, and this erythropoietin helps to stimulate the bone marrow to produce more red blood cells. And this same erythropoietin also helps to regulate your blood pressure and calcium levels. Okay, then we have adipose tissues. Where are adipose tissues located? Beneath skin and around organs. What hormones do they produce? They produce leptin. And leptin is the hormone that regulates hunger and energy balance. What gland again or organ do we have? We have the placenta, especially in a woman who is pregnant. Okay, it's usually, where is it located? In the uterus of the pregnant woman. What hormones do they produce? Human chorionic gonadotrophin, HCG, estrogen, and progesterone. Okay, the functions of these hormones is to maintain pregnancy, fetal development, and then endocrine functions. Okay, then we have the gastrointestinal tract. The gastrointestinal tract, GIT. Okay, where are they located? In the stomach and the intestines. This organ or tract actually secretes gastrin, secretin, cholecystokinin, okay, and others. And these are all hormones. Okay, the functions of these hormones is to coordinate digestion and nutrients processing. Then we have the thymus in children. Okay, thymus, which is behind the sternum, they release or produce the enzyme thymosin, and this thymosin promotes T cell maturation for adaptive immunity. Is that okay? So basically, this is the function of the other endocrine. So you see, like the heart produces the ANP, atrial natriuretic peptide, and then AMP, atrial natriuretic peptide, and then BNP, brain natriuretic peptide. Atrial natriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide. Together, these hormones help to lower blood pressure by promoting sodium and water excretion. Okay, good. So these are the other endocrine glands. This diagram here is showing other endocrine glands. Okay, now let's look at the comparison. So the table above, or the diagram above, shows the differences between the nervous system and then the endocrine system in how they control and coordinate functions in the body. Comparison of the nervous system and endocrine system. Okay, so we have over here, we have the nervous system, and over here we have the endocrine system. Now, in terms of their mode of communication, nervous system uses electrical impulse and neurotransmitters. Okay, nervous system uses electrical impulses and neurotransmitters. For endocrine system, they use hormones. In terms of pathway of signal transmission, the nervous system, the neurotransmitters are released at synapses, acting on target cells. With the hormones or the endocrine system, hormones are released into the bloodstream, affecting distant target cells. So for neurotransmitters, for nervous system, they use neurotransmitters, and these neurotransmitters are released at the places where one nerve cell synapse with another nerve cell. That's the only time the neurotransmitter will be released. But for endocrine system, the hormones are directly released into the bloodstream, and it flows and goes on and on to go and affect distant target cells. Okay, in terms of range of effects, the range of effects of nervous system are usually localized and specific, but for endocrine system, often general and widespread. Okay, the speed of response, nervous system is very fast as compared to the endocrine system. The duration is that the nervous system are short-lived, even though it's very fast, but they don't last longer. Is that okay? But for endocrine system, they are long-acting and they may persist even after the stimulus ends. Okay. Now, in terms of adaptations to stimulation, the nervous system has rapid adaptation to continuous stimulation, whilst endocrine system has slow adaptation, which can last days to weeks. Okay, the type of control for nervous system, the control mechanism is immediate, short-term responses like muscle contraction and reflexes. Short-term. Okay, for endocrine system, there is long-term regulation. For example, growth. Someone can be growing up till about 90 years, and the endocrine system is what is controlling the growth. Okay, metabolism, very long-term regulation. It's not something that ends very soon. Okay, and then reproduction is a continuous lifelong process. Is that okay? It's a continuous lifelong process. So you see how the nervous communication is. Okay, so we have a nerve cell over here. Then we have the target cell. Okay, so if it's a nervous system communication, okay, they are all communication systems. A, B are all communication systems. There's the nervous system. It's a communication system. There's the endocrine. It's also a communication system. So this is the neuron, which is the cell. So the cell releases its impulse. And when it gets to the terminal end of the cell, okay, it releases neurotransmitters. Then through the neurotransmitters, it goes to the target cell. Okay, and here we are talking about electrical impulses. Is that okay? But on the other hand, for the endocrine cells, look at the cells. When they release their secretions, they go into the blood. Then it flows to the blood before it comes to the target cells over here. So the target cells also have the capillary networks surrounding them. Is that okay? So basically, that is it for the introduction to the nervous system. Okay, so remember that these two systems are all communication systems. So now we've actually introduced the endocrine system. In our next video, we are going to look at the various endocrine organs, more specifically the major organs, one after the other, and look at their anatomical characteristics, their functions, the hormone they produce, where they are located, and so many other things. In fact, this brings us to the end of this video, the exegesis of the endocrine system. In fact, the part 2 of the endocrine system would follow. So if you've not subscribed to the channel, make sure you subscribe. Make sure you also put in a comment, and then share this video to families and friends. Encourage your friends to also subscribe. Okay, I hope you now have at least a surface or a clear understanding of how these amazing glands, the endocrine system and the hormones, how they work together to keep your body in a balance. Okay, if you have really learned something today, something new from this video, just make sure you support the channel with a like. Okay, good. So I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for your time.